Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Into the Veil. I'm Rachel. Great to have you here. So we thought we would bring you along as we have been discussing conductivity and a couple of ancient artifacts that have been found, hieroglyphs that have been found, and all of this ties together. But first, I would like to read to you something that I feel is important. When the human race finally steps out of the 3D and learns to understand the layered meaning of symbolism, a great veil shall be lifted from their eyes. So to start out, we have two images to show you. Allow them to sink in, because much of what we're referring to is based on these images tonight. The first is what has been commonly called the Baghdad battery. It was found in Iraq and is possibly as new as 150 BC or as old as 650 BC. The second, even older, is a hieroglyph in Egypt that shows similar batteries. And in the image, there are actually what look like two light bulbs with serpents running in the middle, and at the base of the bulbs look like what I would call
flowers,
where the flower would come up and out of the...
It's a bulb.
It's a bulb. Regardless, these are really fascinating. They've tried to understand what they were used for a long time. We've put our creative genius to work to see what he could recreate, and we thought we'd share that with you also. You want to take over?
Well, a little backstory on this Baghdad battery, as it is called, or what most people know it by. The scientists and scholars that have looked at it and tried to decipher it and figure out what it is, the best answer they could come up with was either a device to electroplate silver onto jewelry, or as some type of a hiding container to put a parchment, a scroll, or something like that in. Now, mind you, it's only 6-7 inches long. It's not going to be much of a scroll. That's more like a note you would pass to your friend, right?
Right. Most of the vessels that they have found scrolls in are actually
big containers,
fairly large containers.
So anyway, if that's the best that they could come up with, I'm not sure what else to say about that. But
we know it's not a battery per se, because it doesn't have
a positive and a negative in and out. It's more of a storage device than it is a battery for powering a source, although it can be rearranged to do that.
Correct.
So it's no coincidence, because there's no such thing as coincidence when we look at the dowsing rods that I make.
We talked about these. Part of what we find to be so productive with these, and you can use other metals. They've been made out of coat hangers, honestly. The conductivity of the rod, I believe, changes somewhat depending on the metal that you use.
Which two primary conductors for electricity would be copper or gold.
And we've explained that can use as crushed quartz and different things to also enable that conductivity. I've gotten a lot of questions about a couple of things. Now, for one, the first thing that comes to my mind, as it's been one of the more recents, is that, you know, I try really hard to hold still But you all know that if you cut off my hands, I can't talk. So part of my challenge is in really freeze framing to only allow the rods to move without any hand movement, no gesture, no nothing. Challenge number one for me. The second thing to realize is the rods are not actually giving you the information. What the rods are doing are reacting to the metals and the electricity within your body.
And within
we have
everything
copper in
around
our
us.
own body. And with everything around us in the electrical part of the atmosphere, if you will. And what these are doing is drawing in energy. So it works with what we would consider to be the superconscious part of our mind, more than the subconscious. And it's access to information that might reside in what we would call the ether or ether, as I like to call it. I noticed for me, the more excited the energy is that I'm working with, I've experienced this particularly with Junior. Anku stays very comfortable and relaxed. But the young ones especially, or super high vibrational energies, what I find is that my body is responding very quickly and rapidly to that excited element. Occasionally, you will see it's a biological, super physical reflex, I guess you could call it, and it's called ideomotor muscle movement. So on those occasions, you will see slight
inertia.
You will see slight
swing a pendulum,
slight movement,
or use the steel kinetic balls where you pull one off and let it smack, and the one on the other end.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same way. The momentum and the inertia move everything else around it.
And part of the reason I bring this up is because I want you, those of you that have gotten these, to realize that if this happens to you, it is a pure, natural, physical response to the energy that you're working with. With that said, also, copper, because that's part of what we are discussing tonight, and the effects of how it draws in and conduces energy.
Okay, so getting back to the Baghdad battery, clay pot that had traces of vinegar inside, that's what they could detect when they did analysis on it. So they used a vinegar wine or some type of a vinegar solution as an electrolyte solution. The tube was made of copper and it had a steel core running through the center of it. So like I said, there's no coincidence. When you look at that, that is essentially a reproduction of what was inside that Baghdad battery, that container. And a clay pot.
So it would go center?
It would rise up a little bit taller than that.
Okay.
And then you would put vinegar in it.
Yeah, we could use vinegar easily.
So what I've got tonight is just some modeling clay. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this up in the kitchen with vinegar and fix that piece of clay around it to hold it in place, and we're going to let it sit on the table here while we're talking tonight. So you go right ahead and I'll be back in a second.
Okay. So there's a lot of debate as to what these were for. I remember back during Desert Storm, the thought came to me there was a huge kerfluffle because in this region it was discovered that certain individuals were calling in what they considered to be jinn. And after Anku had mentioned jinn energies, it got me thinking about it. Now, when we have heard the stories, we have heard about the genies in the bottle. My curiosity made me wonder, were some of these batteries created to harness or hold these other energies? You know, even King Solomon was said to have had control over specific energies. And for each one there was a name or a talisman or a seal, different things that they would use to keep them contained. But there was never any specific mention of what they were contained in. So my thought is that these, although mine...
Careful, because it's full of vinegar.
Yummy. Mine is much prettier. And I do not intend on capturing anything personally at the moment.
Why did I make it?
But I'm thinking that any kind of energy actually could be drawn in and harnessed in a place given the right elements. So theoretically, help me explain the construct again as to what each element would do if you were using it for an energy. The acid would...
Well, the acid is basically an electrolyte solution. The iron rod coming out of the top, consider it like a lightning rod, collecting and drawing the energy of the atmosphere around it. The clay is just a seal to hold it all in place. Right. What they found as a residue that they used for a plug in the original one was a type of like ancient asphalt, like a tar residue. The copper is conducive, of course, and it will help to magnify the energy that's being pulled down through the iron rod. So basically it's an energy storage device.
So if a person really understood how to work with that type of energy, I do believe that you could harness anything specifically. But I also wonder about the scalar energy, the life force energy that's around us consistently, and how that could be utilized in a different way.
Okay, well, I have a little darker theory. All right, bear in mind that energy cannot be created, energy cannot be destroyed. It can only change form.
Correct.
So imagine your body as the outside packaging of a battery. Your internals being the spirit and the conscious mind. Two separate things working in unison. We'll call it the memory disk, or that you would download stuff onto on the computer. USB memory card.
Okay.
So the outside plastic would be the body, then you've got the chip, and then you've got the spark.
Okay.
Chip holds the memory, the spark is what gives it the ability to hold and store the memory.
Okay.
So when the outside packaging can no longer contain the spark and the memory inside and falls away, it's dispersed back out into, let's call it the God consciousness, let's call it the grand consciousness, pick a word, pick whatever label meaning that you want to put onto it. My theory is that they use these in death rituals, people that were of
Passed on.
high power, like priests and otherwise, they would place these near the bodies soon after they had died, and in their thought, in their thinking, they were harnessing and collecting that
essence,
that energy.
Well, that would kind of make sense because they found them in Egyptian tombs also.
And we know the Egyptians were all about reanimation, bringing them back, and that's my theory as to what they were used for.
So whether to protect them, whether to utilize that, can't imagine that there would be a way to physically consume it.
Well, I'm sure that they devised
I'm sorry, I'm just kind of getting grossed out thinking about it.
I'm sure they devised a method to do that, whether they consume the sour vinegar inside or whether they, like in the Egyptian hieroglyphs and images, if they hooked it up in a manner to where a person could try to absorb that energy, kind of like absorbing static electricity.
Well, yeah.
And
just lots of food for thought. And
in their philosophy and their thinking, they were absorbing the energy or the essence or the spirit or whatever you want to call it of the individual they had put it near.
Quite possible.
So,
and even in speaking
I think
of
in their minds they were viewing it as a soul collection vessel.
Well, even in the first question that came to my mind during Desert Storm, when they found out that these individuals, and they may have been related to priests or something of a specific order, that I don't know. But my first question is, what are you doing with it? Because once it's served its purpose for you, what the heck is running loose on the face of the earth that you've summoned?
And that's another potential that it could have been used for. It could have been used, like you said,
containment.
As a containment vessel to collect and capture and hold negative energies, or what they considered daemons or demons, or, Solomon was able to trap and control demons. That's what
I was saying, and it was just something that came to mind, that this was possibly, the whole genie in the bottle thing was actually maybe not as pretty as that, but I just kind of have a feeling that it was a containment for energies that they knew could be very dangerous, potentially.
And I don't think they were wrong in realizing it had the ability to draw energy. I think the labeling that they placed on it was maybe a little off.
Yeah.
But I think naturally it would draw the ambient energy from everything around it. The earth is a living, breathing organism. It has its own electromagnetic field. It has its own pulse. It has its own consciousness. So it's going to pull energies from that. It's going to pull energies from everything around it. Quartz crystal, a rock, the water, the trees, everything that exists has energy. Everything that has matter holds energy.
Oh, yeah.
And there's more energy in the invisible or the hidden, what we term as dark matter, than what is in the known matter.
Well, and even physicists have clearly stated there's actually more empty space in anything with mass than there is mass. So it takes you out of the box a little bit as far as the energy side of it goes. But I know that it just raised a huge storm when they found out that this type of practice was being used to try to gain advantage over, those that they were in conflict with. Their response was like, so? And everybody else is saying, not a fair fight. So yeah, it was just really fascinating to me, and I hadn't heard it prior. But then when I got to thinking about these batteries, I thought, what were they holding those energies in? And when I saw it, just immediately that's what came to mind. Could it be used to harness goods? Certainly.
Energy,
but why would we want to harness good?
energy is energy. It's neither good nor bad. It's the intention you put behind it after the fact that makes it good or evil.
Sure.
Set that to the side, and we're going to
I don't want to wear vinegar.
We're going to do something after a while with it, just as an experiment to see if it's done anything.
Oh boy. Pray for
So we've shown you that Baghdad battery recreation. Just as another example, I made a clip earlier today of taking simple household items and making a battery out of it. So we're going to go ahead and play that clip for you real quick, and then we've got some interesting things to talk about after.
Yep. The second image that we showed you, in that hieroglyph, we have what look like two light bulbs. And the Egyptians were well known as sun worshippers. They understood the conductivity of gold. Oftentimes, they would find, similar to the Baghdad battery, vessels near the mummified remains in tombs. So there's that angle that could be very similar to what we're saying about the Baghdad battery. But we also happen to think back about 10,500 years ago were what were known to be the Kemetic Egyptians. And they very much understood and worked with India. In India, it would be known as the Kundalini. In the Kemetic tradition, it was considered, I believe it's pronounced Uraeus. But these are essentially the same thing, and they have compared both historically, and oftentimes the exact same words were used and the exact same practices were used to raise up this energy and awaken it, if you will, from the root chakra, from the earth herself, the Great Mother. Now, in this, they've actually proven now that the melanin that's in your skin that collects and absorbs light in your spinal column, the fluid, is what is known as neuromelanin. And they call this dark matter. And I don't mean dark as in bad. I mean dark as in, call it consciousness, the void.
It's a warehouse of energy.
Creation. It's like your own battery, your own fluid in your battery. Theoretically, and we did the video on the pineal gland, and ironically, melatonin is what that produces. So I find it interesting how all of these words are very, very similar. So theoretically, when you have the Kundalini or the Uraeus awakening, it's a merge of its energy that comes up from the core of the earth. It's considered divine feminine spirit and blends with your body. It's also very connected to what we've been told is the tree of life. The coiling energy that comes up through the spinal column is called the golden serpent. I find it interesting that so many of the teachings that we've received on the tree of life, the serpent, woman being evil, women always get it, is all very connected to the same physical, now proven, results of what happens when that energy is able to move up into the brain. It literally reroutes the neural pathways of the mind.
But they were on track on the ability to harness energies. They may have revered it as different things than what we know it to be now, but it was so profound that it bled over into every type of country, every type
Culture.
of belief system and culture. The Greeks used it. We know it today as the cauticus and the medical
The physician symbol.
for healing.
And interestingly enough, if you look at that, your spine and your shoulders, where they cross at the base of the spine, symbolically, if you look at the cauticus, it looks very similar, and also looks very similar to
the Egyptian Ankh.
The Christian cross, so consciousness, consciousness, consciousness is the symbol that keeps trying to speak to us and get us to wake up to who we are. Anything else on this that I'm...
Well, I'd kind of like for you to read that statement again that you read at the opening of the video.
Okay. When the human race finally steps out of the 3D and learns to understand the layered meaning of symbolism, a great veil shall be lifted from their eyes.
Yeah, the ancient symbols that have vexed people forever, if they look at them and interpret them with feeling instead of what their eye sees as a logical interpretation, they'll have a greater in-depth understanding of them. This reproduction of this Baghdad battery that we did tonight, there could have been several different uses for it. It could have been as a demon trap, a soul collector, a way to harness and harvest energy from all around.
The ether.
You know, there's so many different applications you could think of, even for that time period.
Maybe it's all of them.
Maybe. So does it work?
Let's find out.
All right, nothing there.
Okay. I know where you sleep.
You see it? Hold the base up. Got a little bit of a reading off of it.
Fascinating.
It's not very strong, but it's only been that way for, what, 20 minutes?
If that, yeah.
But it's got a little bit of a reading. Maybe. Can they see it in the camera, or is the microphone in the way?
Let me hold it a little higher.
A little bit. So what are you trapping in your jar tonight?
No, you made it. I can say, as I think about this, I've had a couple of appointments where I felt the conviction to take bottles, one specific that I can think of, and the bottles have cork. I wasn't sure what I was taking initially, and it was something I was not familiar with having to remove. Sometimes in doing healing work, you're pulling certain types of energy. As an empath, I kind of pull that in and process it out differently. But these were very, for lack of a better word, kind of parasitic energies. And I thought, I don't want to go to pulling anything off without someplace to put it, because it has to have a host. And with that, I found that I had the strongest impulse to take 2 jars. Ironically, one jar had the goofer dust, which is what we use to do house cleansings. It's a specific combination to seal the outside perimeters of a home after it's been cleansed. The primary element in that is clay, and it has snake skin. And
do you need me to give my secret recipe?
Well, we won't give the whole recipe.
It's got crushed red brick, graveyard dirt, crushed up skin from a poisonous snake, charcoal, sulfur, saltpeter, which is essentially black powder, Dead Sea salts, and a few other ingredients that I'm not going to share.
But the heart of it is actually the brick dust. I mean, in bulk. And when we put these energies into that jar, there were a half a dozen, I think, that were of the same type. And I found myself just putting them all in that same jar instinctually. And you could see the jar fog up.
It literally
fogged
into a
up.
cloud inside of the jar.
And I thought, boy, that lid's not coming off there. You're making more goofer dust. But then the other jar felt that it was for something different entirely. And two, as quick as I felt that being energetically crammed into that bottle, it was like, get that cork on it, you know. But these were distinct and distinctly different energies. But I found it fascinating. There's no reason for me to believe that a vessel like this couldn't do the same thing if a person understood how to get it in. Perhaps they didn't even seal it until it was in. We don't know.
Years and years ago, we got called to a situation with a young girl, for lack of a better way to put it. She was vexed by demons.
Yeah.
And we worked on her and worked on her and worked on her, and was finally able to draw a lot of it out and place it into a granite stone.
Mm-hmm. And there's natural radiation in granite. There's a multitude of things that can assist with situations like that. But this particular battery reminded me of that situation and the need to contain things that otherwise have to have a host or have to have something to work through.
And this has been something that has been used in different methodology and form for centuries, like the Dybbuk box to seal up an evil energy, mirrored boxes, different things.
It's come from a lot of ancient tradition. It's come from certain insight given to people as to how to deal with very difficult energies. And I'm not here to judge those things, because I understand some energies don't let go lightly. As far as that quote, the thing about coming out of the 3D and being able to understand the layered meaning of symbolism, even beyond the ancient hieroglyphs, even beyond Native American glyphs, the glyphs we receive from a very ancient people in the woods, all of these things are connected. And much of the transition that we're going through right now, I believe, is calling to us to reach out to what the people, and I think we as mankind, understand to be the great Earth Mother. It's a bond that we share. And by reuniting with that energy, with that feminine aspect, otherwise often referred to as spirit, you know, it's wanting to awaken all of that within us to change the neural pathways of the mind.
And disperse what we perceive as negative and put it back into a neutral state where it can be used for something beneficial.
Bringing everything back to that 0 point. We were talking earlier about the X and Y axis. And I find it interesting because the people often use X and Y. And I believe it's on those two axes where they meet. That's the 0 point of creation. And when we can observe more, judge less, and begin to bring it back into that void space where it can be
malleable
and able to be transmuted into something else. I often look at a negative emotion. We look at anger as an example. Anger does root out of fear, but it's also exceptionally protective of the things that it cares for. So not everything that roots out of fear necessarily signatures a big evil. Of course, there are different degrees of that expression. But if you look at the root of it, you can also find what it's trying to become. You can look at the heads of the coin instead of the tails of the coin if you're standing on that rim between the two. So just food for thought as we're working with energy. I think we covered everything. It's a lot of little information in there. Last thoughts?
So are you going to give this jar away to some lucky individual, or I'm curious to see how it grows over the next few days?
I have no idea what I'm doing with
We'll
this
have to
jar.
put it in the curio cabinet with all of the other trapped oddities that have...
Stuff. Yeah. Well, it will be... we will have to discern what's producing the electromagnetic frequency there. I'd like to think that it's nothing on the downside.
But as a finishing thought on my end tonight, the true meaning of alchemy is not the ability to change lead into gold. It's being able to transform yourself into gold.
Yeah.
Taking your lowest and most negative aspects and changing them into a positive, higher good.
And I think the other thing in this shift that we're all going through is facing all of our own inner limitations, all of the things that we have created, all the things that we believe that are holding us back from that level of the awakening, and being able to embrace those energies instead of consistently pushing them away, but embracing them as part of our own shadow and saying, okay, whether you belong to my ancestor, whether you belong to a collective, or whether you belong to me, ultimately at the end of the day, in that layering, it's all the same. And our willingness to work through those things and look at them honestly and say, why am I feeling this? Why am I going through this? And then processing it in a way that's more accepting. I feel ultimately will help with that reawakening process. And many of us have awakened. Many of us have been on our own paths of ascension. But I think the bigger step is really embracing all of those uglies, embracing what we perceive as weaknesses, and figuring out how to use them to catapult us into our best version. Use them like that fuel, harnessing that energy to bring us into greater levels of light and awareness. Just my opinion. So, with that said, thank you for being here. As always, if you have questions about the rods, Ormus, personal sessions, reach out to me through my email. I appreciate each and every one of you and hope to be back very soon. Good night.